It is Friday, June 8th, 2018, and this is Seahawks Chats with Kenneth Arthur. And today on the show, we've got Stephen Cohen of the Athletic Seattle to talk about the Seattle Seahawks, and we'll get into Deion Jordan. We'll get into the rumor mill, how rumors get started and ultimately disappoint, and a whole lot else that's going on with the Seahawks. At the top of the show, I just want to talk briefly about some just the logistics of podcasting and putting this together. If you listened to last week's episode with Rob Staten and read any of the article that I posted with that podcast, or maybe you just listened to this show on iTunes and you didn't hear any of this because I didn't say any of it, would really appreciate, if anyone has the inclination to throw a buck or two to the Field Goals Podcasting Patreon. We'd really like to keep the show going, not behind any sort of paywall, but just be able to exist and thrive as a show and get better. So if there's anything that you would like to contribute, that's at patreon.com/fieldgoals to the Patreon. If you would like to help keep the show not behind a paywall and just, increase Seahawks chats and Seaside chats and 3000 NFL mock draft. The three podcasts that I'm doing on my own here for Field Goals to just sort of keep those things going. So that's patreon.com/fieldgoals. And now we just got that part out of the way and we can get into the Seahawks, which is what you really came here for. And as I said before, it's June 8th. We're in the middle of the summer. We ain't got much going on, but OTA is kicking off. And we do have Stephen Cohen of the Athletic Seattle. And Stephen, let's just start with the Athletic Seattle because the Athletic is something that came around. I don't know when it started, but, I don't know how much backstory you can give or want to give on that. But people were anticipating it coming to some of the major cities, and eventually it did come to Seattle. So can you talk a little bit about what the Athletic is? And just for anyone listening, this is not something that me and Steven talked about ahead of time. I'm not, this is not an advertisement, nothing like that. No handshake agreement. But I'm honestly curious because I think even for me, the Athletic is a mystery unto itself sometimes, and just wanting to know about its growth and just the what people can expect from the Athletic. So, Stephen, can you give some of the background there? Because Field Goals readers and listeners will be familiar with at least two of your writers and video people there.
Yeah. So we don't talk about the kickbacks you're getting after this, right? This is not something we're going to discuss on air. Your subscriber kickbacks. Okay. All right. So
no.
In lieu of that, it's a subscription service. It's basically trying to recreate kind of the sports page of old, where now online. I mean, everybody who has to work with an ad-based revenue model, the things that come along with that are ads all over the page and pop-ups and autoplay videos and all that stuff. And basically, this was started by a couple of people who were sort of just tired of getting their sports news that way and wanted to go back and just they want to read articles, in-depth articles. And that's kind of what this is. All it is. I mean, if you look at if you go into the site, or if you have a subscription, you open the app up, it's basically text and some photos, and that's it. It's a very easy kind of streamlined experience. And they started expanding about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago now. And they started by just going after prominent sports writers in different markets, and it spread like wildfire. So Seattle started officially this spring with Corey Brock writing about the Mariners and Matt Pence writing about the Sounders. And then I came on with Michael Sean Dugar, who's going to be doing Seahawks, Jason Jenks, who's going to be doing features from all over, a lot of Seahawks stuff, a lot of other stuff as well. And then we have kind of a talented group of freelancers that's being compiled too, and they tend to be along the lines of sabermetric stuff in baseball, or analytics and film analysis in football and things like that, really people want to go in depth with, and they want to go they don't want a quick take. You know, they want to go deep. They want to spend some time with something. Hopefully that's what we're providing. And it's, you know, a full membership costs $5 a month, so $60 a year. But they're always running promos to where you get a 20, 30, 40% off of a yearly subscription. So it's really, that's the model, and it's been going, I've been there a month now, and it's been going great so far.
Yeah, for sure. What do you think, as you previously were at the Seattle PI, and obviously you came on the show when you were at the Seattle PI, what do you see as the future of, sports news or news distribution with the internet and subscription features and that kind of thing? Because obviously you and I and everybody, for the most part, listening to this that's over the age of, 20 or 25, grew up with newspapers and grew up with the PI and the Times and all these kinds of things. Like, it's a complicated issue, but at the same time, part of me is thinking like, oh, it's a scary situation if you're a writer, or if it's a scary situation if you really liked the Times or the PI or whatever. But on the other hand, I'm like, is it cyclical? Did they have these same issues? Did they have these same conversations in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s?
Right,
do you believe that it's cyclical, or do you believe that this is a turning point?
Yes. I sort of believe both of those things.
Yeah.
It's funny. We kind of, and I say we because this as an industry, but early on in the age of the internet, we decided that we were going to give away our content for free, most of us, and that we were going to rely on ad sales. And that probably would have worked if like stuff like Craigslist hadn't killed classified ads and things like that. So you have this really interesting dilemma, which is, it's running print journalism, and even online journalism to a large degree, is still running off of the same revenue model that they were running off of in the 20s and 30s. And just now it's such a different delivery system, and the ad rates are so much lower now. So without getting too nitty gritty, I don't want to sound doom and gloom here, but like the idea that you can just have an ad-based newspaper and have sort of robust local coverage, I think is something we're seeing is just not sustainable anymore, because the money's not there. You just can't make enough money on ads to do that. So you have to go subscription-based. You see people, you see local outlets, you see national outlets. They're really going after subscribers because they need sort of that bedrock foundation of subscribers to be able to even do what they want to do journalistically. So with something like Athletic, it's like, okay, they're just cutting out the idea of like trying to go for ad revenue and all. We're just going to go for subscriptions. We're going to try and keep the price low enough that there's value there, that when you log in and you read the content, you think, all right, I'm fine paying $5 a month for this because I think this is great. And that's actually been kind of the coolest part for me. I was a little bit skeptical when I first heard about The Athletic too, to be completely honest. And then I got a membership and started reading stuff from baseball writers I like, Jason Stark and Peter Gammons and things like that. And I was just like, you know what, I could be behind this. And then when you start seeing it with your membership to The Athletic, you get all of the team sites. So I can go read Golden State coverage from people who've been covering the Warriors for a long time and have really good relationships there and get scoops. And I think when you start to like boil all of that down, it's like, oh, this is a really good value proposition. So hopefully it is. It's been a nice start. I've heard a lot of really nice things from people who have gotten memberships since we launched in Seattle, and they all seem to be, for the most part, people seem to be really excited about it and really think the content's worthwhile. So it's my job to make sure that keeps going, and it's a pretty easy job right now because we have fantastic writers. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's get into some of the Seahawks talk. The news today for the Seattle Seahawks is knee surgery for Deion Jordan that puts him on the shelf, expected 6 to 8 weeks. And it's unfortunate news for a guy like Jordan who, there's a lot of expectations of him being a starting pass rusher, which is, one of the most important positions on any team, certainly in Seattle where they're trying to replace Michael Bennett and Cliff Averill. And then two, for a guy like Jordan who has missed so much time in his career and really needs as much practice and work and an understanding of, just building off of what he did in his short stint last year to get up to speed. How much, if you miss the next 8 weeks of Seahawks football, how much are you missing?
Not much. I mean, the nice thing is that the timing is fine because we're going into, basically 2 months of nothing. We're going to have mini camp next week, I believe, for a few days, and then it's nothing until training camp. And so from that perspective, it's pretty that's as good as you could hope for, frankly, with Jordan. The problem with him is that this is not his first go around with knee stuff. This is at least his third knee surgery, I believe. And it was a major issue in Miami when he was coming back from suspension and stuff like that. His knee injury is eventually what kind of led him to be kind of kicked out of town there. So that's really troubling because I think they really are counting on him to be. They're not counting on him to be Cliff Averill or Michael Bennett. They are counting on him to be, I think, 1A, or maybe, Frank Clark is 1A. They're counting on him to be 1B or, number 2 in the rotation on defensive end. I think they're going to go at it from a numbers game more than just relying like they have been the past couple of years on Averill and Bennett. So that's troubling. I think that should be worrying to Seahawks fans. It's as much as you want to be worried about football in early June. The saving grace again is that the timing is okay for right now. He's not going to really miss anything. He's been in the program for a year. So, you would think that he's, as far as installs go and understanding scheme and everything like that, even though they're switching defensive coordinators, this is really a Pete Carroll defense they're going to be running. So it's not going to be a ton of changes. So there's a silver lining. I would say there should be some concern there if this knee is going to be an issue again.
And speaking of, defensive line injuries, that kind of thing, the reports a few weeks or a couple months ago were, the Seahawks are getting ready to release Malik McDowell, and that has not transpired at this point. And, even today with I don't know how much you were on Twitter today, but lots of rumors that the Patriots are going to make the biggest announcement of the dynasty era or whatever. And then, no, they're not, or something like that. And with the Seahawks, we have heard that this year as well, too, with Earl Thomas trade rumors and not just general ones, but there were days of this offseason where people were like, today the Seahawks are going to break. They're going to huge news. And then nothing happens. With the Malik McDowell stuff, how much do you think there is truth to the possibility of them releasing Malik McDowell this year at some point?
I'm 99% sure they're going to release him. And that's more based on not any specific rumor, but just based on the totality of the way that they've been talking about him and the way that has changed in this off season. I think there's something going on between his camp, his people, and the Seahawks. It seems like there's been a breakdown in communications. And when you ask Pete Carroll about him now, it's very short, succinct answers, one word, nope, yep. Do you expect him to be ready for a training camp? Nope. Do you, that kind of thing, which to me, that speaks pretty loudly. And I don't know about the report that came out that they were going to release him imminently. There really wasn't any reason to release him at that time. So the Seahawks, like any NFL team, often don't do things until they're required to, numbers wise, or if they have a better option, they want to move on or something like that. But this might be a thing where they're trying to work out some kind of settlement. It was a non-football injury, obviously, and so they're probably going to try to recoup signing bonuses and stuff like that, and that can get contentious. And I just wouldn't plan on Malik McDowell being a part of this team ever, really.
Just the whole thing around Malik McDowell and why it's shrouded in mystery. I mean, it's been about a year since his reported ATV accident. And in that year, as far as I know, as someone who, obviously spends every day reading Seahawks news and paying attention to what's going on, as far as I know, No one's ever said what happened. No one's ever talked to a witness. No one's ever shown a picture of an accident. No one's ever shown a video. No one's ever said what Malik McDowell's actual injuries are. There's only been rumors about face and concussions, and no one's ever seen Malik McDowell except him looking in health. You know, like, not that he looks healthy, but there's not like, he's not like showing pictures in a neck brace or a face, you know, wearing gauze around his face or anything like that. Why mysteries? Why not just say what happened to Malik McDowell?
Well, I think if we're talking about communications breakdowns, I think what you're seeing there is maybe people in his corner who are pretty reticent to talk about what happened. I don't think the Seahawks have the full details of what happened there or the full information on his injuries or something like that. And I think that might be the reason why kind of the relationship between the team and the player has deteriorated. And it might be in his best interest not to be completely forthcoming about the nature of the injury if they think it's going to be something that's going to result in him having to give back money. So you can understand it from that perspective, right? That would make sense. But he was at the team facility for the second half of last year, for a lot of the second half of last year, and people saw him there, and they saw evidence of some injuries. Not, you know, like you said, not like a neck brace or a giant scar running along his forehead or anything like that, but like some evidence of some injuries. And I don't want to go into that because I didn't see it myself. I just heard from people who were there. But it's just, you know, nobody's talking about it. And nobody, like I said, when you ask Pete about it, when you ask other, you know, GM, when you ask John Schneider about it, when you ask teammates, you know, right after it happened, like what was happening, there was just no information. And speculating wildly here, I would imagine that's because there's not a ton of information coming from his camp, and that they might have some very good reasons for that. But yeah, it has been a mystery, which is interesting in this day and age of social media and all that. So yeah, I guess, I don't know if we'll ever find out, honestly. I would imagine at some point we will. When people don't think they have anything to lose by talking about it. But right now, because there's still money at stake, I think that's what you're seeing.
Yeah. And why not just, you know, wrap up the defensive line and some of the questions around the defensive line, because it is, you know, they're losing. It's the place that they've probably lost the most talent, certainly 3 starters. Yeah. Jaron Reed has to be that guy. Frank Clark has to be that guy this year. Outside of those guys and some of the guys that need to step up, Rasheem Green, Brandon Jackson, Quentin Jefferson, Marcus Smith. Any thoughts there as to who you would expect to maybe contribute the most, or maybe a guy that through OTAs or rookie minicamp, someone who could step up, and maybe if it's a Marcus Smith or someone that the coaches speak highly of?
I think for me, the guess would be Naz Jones, just because he looked really good in sort of limited attempts as a rookie. And just what they've done around him, where they've gotten sort of veteran guys who are not like marquee names. They didn't really, you know, target interior help in the draft or anything like that, as I can recall. I might be completely wrong about that. No, they got Rasheem Green for the outside, but I think they really liked what they saw from him. And I think he was a guy, based on his college career and sort of the illness that he had gone through, that people were like, didn't really know what kind of commodity he was coming out. And I think he showed that he can be an impact player inside, and play, you know, that, I don't even know if he's going to play the nose or more of a 3-tech or whatever, but he was effective. He was really effective. And then he got injured towards the end of the year there and knocked out again. But I do think that they're going to plan on him and Jaron Reed inside being sort of the guys in, again, what you're going to see is like a long rotation there. But sort of like what we saw in those Super Bowl years when you had, you know, Brandon Mebane and then a mixture of sort of Quentin McDonald, Tony McDaniel, and then Ataba Rubin came in there, where you had sort of the top 2 guys and then you had rotation underneath that. I think you're going to see those 2 guys be sort of the focal point inside, and it's going to be a big it's going to be a big focus for them to really help this run defense that you know, we're used to seeing play so well, but we're not, you know, we don't have the name recognition that we used to along that line. So Naz Jones is the guy who I think will have a big year, and I think if he has a big year, that bodes well for sort of the future of that line moving forward.
Another guy too that is playing on that defense that I think is someone that could, sort of be a sleeper maybe, or in the case of just contributing more than he's contributed throughout a career that has been shrouded in disappointment, is Barkevious Mingo. And it seems like giving him a 2-year deal. Do you expect that that position on the weak side, outside linebacker or whatever is going to be differently used than it was in the last couple of years after Bruce Irvin left? Do you think that you could see a return to sort of using that player more than they have in the last 2 years, or with the fact that they, did get success? And it's interesting too with the rise of the nickel cornerback and the slot receiver. Like Justin Coleman is so important when they do go to 3 cornerbacks. So how much do you expect that linebacker and Bark Mingo to get used?
I think he'll be used a lot, but I don't think he'll be used a lot as a linebacker. I think he'll do sort of like that 30% of the downs as a linebacker, and then you'll see him in that pass rush rotation. So basically playing kind of the role that Irvin played in his last couple of years in Seattle here. And if they can, if he can get anything like the production they got under Bruce, I mean, that would be great, because they really haven't had that since he left. They went with, he's a guy who will probably help on special teams too. And, but what they would love for him to do is just kind of hold his own as a weak side linebacker and then come in on those rush downs, help apply pressure there. He's a guy, like Barkevious Mingo's career hasn't been as bad, I think, as everybody thinks it's been, but it's just when you get taken that high and you aren't a star, or you do change teams like that, you kind of get labeled as like a massive bust. And he's just been okay. He's been fine. And if he can be just a little bit more than fine for the Seahawks, they'll be okay with that. But I don't expect him to be playing a ton of linebacker snaps next year. Justin Coleman, though, by the way, can I just say that guy is maybe the most underrated player on this defense, and one of the more underrated defensive backs in the NFL based on what he did last year. He was awesome, and it was a tremendous pickup right before the season last year.
Yeah, I mean, it's another thing that I feel like there's so much, sometimes it feels this way. And I think sometimes we have to, as writers or as people that see it from this perspective, where we're putting out the news, so we sort of like get back the thoughts of the people. But I think a lot of times the people speak more when they feel something negative than when they feel something positive. So the perception on our end is that it's negative.
Yeah.
But with Justin Coleman and stuff, there's a lot of talk. It feels like, oh, John Schneider and Pete Carroll aren't as good at finding players as they used to be. But when you talk about trading a 7th round pick for Justin Coleman, I mean, they're still making good moves and finding good players that are being underrated around the league, right? I feel like that's still happening in pretty much the same, maybe at the same rate that it used to. They just haven't found maybe that Richard Sherman and Cam Chancellor as often.
I mean, that's the thing too, is like Schneider and Carroll sort of set themselves up because their hits were so big those first couple of years. It's not like they're getting useful starters in the 5th and 6th rounds. They were getting all pros, which is like, you're never going to be able to reproduce that. I don't know, however many years you do this, you're going to get that a couple of times in your career. Maybe they just kind of happened it all happened at once, and they got a Super Bowl out of it. So like, you can't take that away from them ever. They hit. You're right in that they're still getting value. It's just, the league has gotten smarter about drafting. I think, and I think some of that has to do with the fact that you see people from like the Seahawks staff or some people from New England or Green Bay, teams that traditionally drafted pretty well, and now they're running franchises elsewhere. So you're just seeing this kind of proliferation of these good theories of how you draft teams. The teams are drafting better. So how do you get, value now? Well, you look at depth charts. You try and figure out, is New England going to part with this nickel corner? We think he can do something with us. Cool, we'll give him a 7th round pick. They were going to cut him anyway. And then you come in and get a guy like Justin Coleman, who played incredibly well and really bailed them out for, they thought Jeremy Lane was going to be the guy after signing that extension here. And just after signing that extension, he was pretty terrible. So that's another way of creating value, just by doing it on the trade market, by finding guys in free agency who help. I think about a guy like a Taba Rubin a couple of years ago, who was not like a he wasn't like a prime free agent pickup, right? But he came in there and played for, I think, 2+ years along the defensive line. And Pete Carroll said he was the best 3 tech he'd had there. And like, that's value too. So they're just doing it in different ways. And I think it's not as flashy because you're not seeing the heights. But it's again, the test is to continue to evolve as a league continues to evolve. And after those first couple of Seahawks drafts with Schneider and Carroll, the league evolved because they saw what was happening and they tried to reproduce it. And so it got harder. So yeah, they're still doing a lot of work. It's just, I think the league has gotten a little bit smarter now.
And, tying in the defense players and the injuries and the not knowing what's going on, the Seahawks released Cliff Averill, and then he also was just like, well, they released me and I really just can't play anymore. And so I'm going to go do some work in the journalism and broadcasting field. And that's great. But we didn't get that that was all expected. And so was an expected, maybe the same thing around Cam Chancellor, but Cam Chancellor remains a Seahawk and remains adamant that if he can play, he will play. When is a sort of deadline for knowing what the future of Cam Chancellor is? Because I know that they can't save any money this year by releasing him and don't really have much to gain from it. But at the same time, if he gets a report this year that he can never really play again without risking his long-term health, is there any sort of deadline or expected time when we would find out what's really going to happen with Cam Chancellor?
I would expect the deadline to be the beginning of the season. There are reports that basically he is having one more scan this month. He may have already had it, to sort of determine whether or not he can play. But all indications are that his career is over, which is really sad for a guy who, was a favorite, I think, for fans here, but also was a guy who just like kind of embodied the style that the Seahawks played with. So I think he's done. From a player's perspective, you never want to give the team any ammunition to, again, come after a signing bonus or anything like that. So you don't want to ever play your hand until you have to when money's involved. And so I think what they'll do is they'll just wait until, the Seahawks are forced to make a roster decision with him and put him on the PUP list. And then probably work out some kind of settlement for him to retire with an injury. So I wouldn't expect anything right away from that because I think, they'll take their time negotiating. And we know that Cam's negotiations with the team have been a little bit fraught the last couple of years, if we can say that. So I just think it might take a little bit of time. It could be tomorrow, and this will all sound ridiculous. But that would be my guess, is it would be closer to the beginning of the season.
Yeah. How do you, and moving to the offense, how do you see, coaches or the player reaction to the new coaches? How do you see things going so far with Mike Solari? Because Tom Cable was such a focus of people's attention for so long. And now they wanted him replaced, and he got replaced. So theoretically, everyone should just be happy that there's a new guy. But at the same time, this isn't Mike Solari's first go around with Seattle. This isn't he didn't come off of a great season in terms of if you were just judging him on the play of the New York Giants offensive line last year.
Right.
But what exactly are you seeing? Is there an attitude change? What exactly is going on with Mike Solari so far?
So I think the early returns are good. Like he wanted the guys who were there to bulk up a little bit. Ethan Posick, I think, is the most obvious example. 15 pounds or something like that from last year. So they're going to try and be rely a little bit less on the zone scheme, which requires a lot of lateral movement, quick movement from large men. And just try to power people. And I think that makes sense in today's league. Zone schemes are hard, particularly with the amount of practice time that you don't have in the NFL anymore, to install things like that. It's all reliant on movement, and it's reliant on people being very orchestrated and really being on the same page. And you would see last year, in the last few years, where you just have one guy who is a tick slow, and it just destroys the entire play. So Solari's scheme seems to be a little bit more straightforward, just going to try and manhandle people. And I think that, probably jives with Brian Schottenheimer's idea of how you play offensive line, how you play offense. It definitely jives with how Pete Carroll would like to play offense. So it all makes sense. I know that Pete Carroll didn't really want to move away from Tom Cable. He had a lot of respect for him, but the results year after year were just so poor that he really didn't have a chance. And I think, part of that was too, they wanted to bring in a guy who was just going to coach offensive linemen, who wasn't going to maybe be the guy giving input on scouting these offensive linemen, which is what Cable did. They gave him a voice in the room, and the guys that he vouched for were guys like Jermaine Ifedi, who haven't lived up to the hype yet and haven't proven themselves to be, consistent NFL starters. Or maybe they've been consistent, but not consistent in the way you'd like. So yeah, I think the early returns are good. It's, it's hard to tell right now because you're just watching guys kind of jog around in shorts, and you're never going to, see what that, translates to until the preseason. But they did need to do something there. It was probably overdue. And so any move is probably the right move at this point.
The Seahawks really only lost one receiver. That was Paul Richardson, and obviously he took up a significant amount of the volume of targets for wide receivers. But they're still bringing back Doug Baldwin and Tyler Lockett. Doug Baldwin, in my opinion, the best slot receiver in the NFL, one of the best receivers in the NFL. Period. Tyler Lockett, he's been slowed down the last year or so with with an injury, and I think just getting back up to speed with all that at a time when he was still developing as a receiver when he broke his leg, and hopefully he's able to sort of build upon what he was building on before that and just become more consistent. But in losing just one receiver, the Seahawks response has been Brandon Marshall, Jaron Brown, Marcus Johnson, Demoria Stringfellow, and then they're already bringing back Tanner McAvoy, David Moore, Amara Darboh, Cyril Grayson, and they can not only just keep 5 or 6 of these guys, but I mean, like I said, they may only have one spot that's going to get significant targets at the receiver position. How do you see those 6 or 7 or 8 guys shaking out in terms of, is Brandon Marshall, did they sign him because they looked at all the guys that they'd brought in and were just like, no, I don't think any of this is going to work as much as we wanted to, or, even if it doesn't work, we just need a veteran option to maybe take a look at? Or was it just, hey, Brandon Marshall's available and he doesn't cost anything, let's just do that? Like, where do you see the Brandon Marshall signing fitting into their expectations for the large group that they already had?
I honestly, I think it's more like it was a risk reward situation for them, where it was like, oh yeah, this guy's, the upside for Brandon Marshall is that he is a, above average, at this point in his career, above average NFL wide receiver, and you're paying him the league minimum to do that. And I was talking to Mike Dugar on his show last week, and he was like, yeah, the math on that works out. if you get average or above average for minimum, that works out. The problem isn't necessarily, I think, the depth in the receiving core, because there are a lot of guys who are just sort of, I don't know, similar spots, unproven, have some talent, obviously, and like might turn into NFL players. It's a proven NFL player, that depth that you just don't have. And I would say, aside from Baldwin, they really don't have anybody who's a proven weapon right now. Tyler Lockett, he sort of rounded into form toward the end of last year, back to the guy who we saw before early in his career. But that injury, like you said, it hit him it was a bad time, because it was right when he's developing into this kind of consistent threat. And then, he's sidelined for it. And not just sidelined with an injury, but with a really serious one, a really scary one, honestly. And that was hard, I think. And I think the jury's still out on whether or not he can kind of return to being the guy who we thought he was going to be through his first, couple of NFL seasons. The Marshall thing is a risk-reward thing. They're not risking a lot. And if he works out, it's going to be great, because, he is he's a guy who's just done it for years and years and years. And you look at his numbers from 3 years ago, and they were phenomenal with Ryan Fitzpatrick throwing him the ball. So there's no risk there. That's fine with that move. I have no problem with that move. Jaron Brown is another, or Jerron Brown rather, is another guy who like we'd watch him play the Seahawks twice every year, and he'd be like, yeah, that guy seems like he could be a decent NFL player. And he was buried in the Cardinals depth chart there, but maybe he's a guy who comes and becomes like a bigger part of the offense here. Marcus Johnson, I have honestly no idea about, know nothing about that guy. So I know he's fast and he's big, so they'll try and find a spot for him. The rookies from last year, they would really love for Amara Darboh to make a big step this offseason and to become a big part of this offense, because he didn't do anything last year. And that's not, people have been sort of like, I think, really critical of him for his rookie year, his lack of contribution his rookie year, but that's not unusual for wide receivers. It's a hard position to do something as a rookie. So I wouldn't be shocked if he came in and was a much bigger part of this offense. The moves that they've done to just, like you said, get this sort of like 5 guys competing for one spot, that doesn't inspire a lot of confidence from me in what they see in Darboh, and maybe what they experienced with him that first year. But maybe there's something there. The guy I really do like is David Moore, just from like, when you go to these practices in the off season, like there's honestly a lot of just kind of looking around and trying to figure out what you're watching, because it's just guys running drills and shorts. But there's something about him, like there's a suddenness to him that I really like, that sort of reminds me a little bit of what Doug is able to do. And I know that's high praise, but he's a guy who I think has a potential to have a skill set that like translates to the NFL. And he was a guy, they showed a little bit what they thought of him last year when they elevated him from the practice squad, ostensibly so he couldn't get picked up by another team. So they didn't want to lose him. They wanted another year of watching him develop. So if I'm picking one guy who I think might be kind of a dark horse to be a contributor there, it's David Moore.
Interesting. Yeah, for sure. I think that's another guy that so many guys that we just want to see what would happen if you gave them, if they got 50 targets next year or 100 targets, and just to see, that's always the interest. And so much of this stuff will be cleared up, once the preseason hits and depth charts hit, and it'll be exciting to watch, which is a good transition. I want to just play a game of like who will have a bigger impact next season, and put you on the spot to make a few guesses as to who, with these openings on the roster and openings among the starting lineup to like sort of have an impact as veterans go out. I'm curious, who will have a bigger impact in 2018 for the offense, Amara Darboh or Nick Vannett?
Ooh, that's a really good one, actually. Because if I'm honest, I think the team has soured on both of them. From initial, I know this is like skewing negative, but from like initial sort of like what it could be, I think maybe they've realized, all right, these guys aren't exactly who they could be. So I'll say Darboh, because I think with bringing in Will Dissly and Ed Dixon, it shows what they want out of a tight end in that offense, which is they want him to be able to block. And then, receiving skills are going to be sort of a bonus. Vannett, when he came in, right, it was the same thing we were hearing about Dissly this season. Oh, he's the best blocker in the draft. He's the best blocker in the draft. And then we just haven't seen it, that really at all. So the fact that they went and got 2 more blocking guys, I think tells you what you need to know about what they see from Vannett moving forward. And maybe I'm wrong, and he turns a corner, but Darboh would be my choice there.
Good reasoning. Who will have a bigger impact in 2018? CJ Prosise or JD McKissick?
Oof. Prosise. This is a faith pick, I think, because I want to see CJ Prosise on the field for this team, and I want to see him as a third down back at 225 pounds, who can line up in the slot and run routes. JD McKissick is a nice little player, and he's carved out a niche for himself, and he's been everything they could ask for him, right? Prosise, if he's healthy, is a different level player. He's just a different guy. We saw it against the Patriots. We saw it against the Eagles. When he had those moments, he just needs to stay on the damn field. So I don't know. I'll hope against hope that that's going to happen. I'll say pro size.
And this is a little off course, but it's not exactly who will have a bigger impact. But just sticking with the running backs,
Yeah.
it's from all reports, Chris Carson looks phenomenal and athletic shape and all this kind of stuff. Are there chances that Chris Carson will be the starter in Week 1 and have the opportunity to win that job and keep that job, and that Rashad Penny, maybe as a rookie year will be just sort of a backup and come in when they want him to come in? Or do you think they drafted him with that higher pick with fully the intention to, get 4 or 5, starting years out of him?
I think they did draft him with that intention, but I do think it's possible Carson beats him out. Because I think, Pete Carroll really likes Chris Carson. He showed a lot last year before getting hurt. There's other things that Penny can do in that offense too. He doesn't have to be a guy who touches it 15, 20 times a game. He can be a guy who can run routes. He can come in and be a passing down back, be a third down back. He can help you in the return game if you want, Tyler Lockett to maybe take a few less lumps that way. So it's not like they'd be like wasting the pick if they started Chris Carson. It would be like, they got pleasantly surprised by how well Carson came back from this injury. And I think based on what we know about how Pete Carroll feels about Chris Carson, I wouldn't put that past him at all.
And with moving on to the defense and some of these for the defense, between Rasheem Green and Shaquem Griffin, who do you think will have a bigger impact for the Seahawks? I'll let you throw in special teams, whatever impact that may have. But who do you think has a bigger impact between Shaquem Griffin and Rasheem Green?
Rasheem Green, I think, because they're linebacker is going to be a hard spot to get to see the field for the Seahawks. And Shaquem Griffin is so interesting because probably the best thing he did at Central Florida last year was rush the passer. But I don't know if a 220-pound guy can rush the passer, can rush from the outside in the NFL. Maybe they can, but I just haven't seen it yet. Rasheem Green, on the other hand, I think is going to be given a chance to come into that rotation, like I said earlier in the show, because they've got Frank Clark, they've got Deion Jordan, they've got Marcus Smith, they've got a couple of other guys at end, but nobody who's really going to take 70% of the snaps there. They're going to really rely on a numbers game there, and they would love for Rasheem Green, I think, to be a part of that rotation sooner than later. So I'll say him.
And, there's so much to figure out with the, just like sort of the receiver depth, the cornerback depth is really interesting, and just sort of finding out, because they've brought in veterans like Dante Johnson, and then they've brought in, rookie converts like Trey Flowers. Any feeling between, say, Trey Flowers and Dante Johnson, or someone who could have that upper edge to be the first cornerback behind Coleman and Griffin and Maxwell? Also, Nico Thorpe is in there. So anybody within that mix that you think could be like the next corner up after those top three?
I'd probably say Johnson between those guys. Thorpe is a guy who they've given chances to before, and he just doesn't seem like it's coming for him. It seems like they basically say that he's a special teams guy first and foremost. And Johnson's a guy who started before. Flowers, to me, is a project, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if he's like a practice squad guy this first year, honestly, because he's a tall, kind of stiff dude who is going to need to learn a new position, and they just may give him some time to do that. The one guy I wouldn't totally count out, although he hasn't been on the field since I've been out there this offseason, is my guy from Colorado State, DeAndre Elliott. I just think they liked him. I think they liked the fact that they could maybe put him in the slot and put him outside, and that's why they kept him. They liked him on special teams. He had a really, really hard injury at the end of last year that I think for a lot of guys, sort of given his pedigree, that maybe would have ended their NFL careers, and he's still on the roster. He's still around. So I think there's maybe a reason for that, and they want to see if he can come back and be a part of this team. So he's my dark horse there, and not just because he went to CSU.
But mostly because he went to CSU.
But mostly because he went to CSU.
Yeah. Mostly that. No, perfectly understandable. And I guess just in general with the team, well, I guess also just say, is there any chance, do you think that John Ryan does beat out Michael Dixon for the punting job?
Nope.
It's just, it's all there.
I would like him too, because I really like John Ryan and I like Sarah, his wife, a lot too. But I think John Ryan will compete really hard and will do very well and will be punting for somebody else in the NFL next year. Because he's too good of a player not to be, starting.
And let's just move into the finale here with the Seattle Seahawks. Offense, defense, so much going on with the the talk of all the coaching changes and all of the getting moving on from Richard Sherman and Cliff Averill and Michael Bennett and probably Cam Chancellor. Lots of Jimmy Graham, Paul Richardson, lots of stuff going out, and then a lot of different pieces coming in that are a lot cheaper, and that's a benefit. That also, we'll just see how it all fits together because there are a lot of changes. But in terms of where this team was in 2017, which was, a 9-7 team, not that far off from the playoffs, a team that a month before the playoffs had beaten the Philadelphia Eagles pretty easily. And was in a position to think like, oh, maybe if this next month goes well, Russell Wilson will win the MVP. They'll go to the playoffs. Maybe they won't catch up to the Rams, but maybe they'll go 10-6 and 11-5 and get in a wild card. It wouldn't be that hard for them to get into the divisional round for the 6th year in a row. So there were things there that were pretty good, but then the negatives for sure that they could be trending downward. And then they did fire the offensive coordinator, the defensive coordinator, the offensive line coach, the assistant head coach was the same person. Definitely out with some stuff, but the pieces that are still in place include, Russell Wilson and Dwayne Brown and Doug Baldwin and Earl Thomas. So Bobby Wagner, KJ Wright, all these things put together. Do you expect the 2018 team to be better, worse, the same than the 2017 team?
It's a really good question. It's hard to know how to answer it in a vacuum because you have to take into account the context of the division as well. Like I expect the Rams to be excellent, not just because they were so good last year and not just because they have these offseason additions this year, but because like a combination of that and the fact that I trust Sean McVay to use those pieces well. I also think the 49ers are up and coming. I think Jimmy Garoppolo is the real deal. And that's a team, all of a sudden, when you have a quarterback, you're not rebuilding anymore. The Seahawks definitely aren't rebuilding. That's the one thing that, like, when you've got Russell Wilson, the franchise quarterback, when you've got players on defense like Bobby and KJ and Earl and those guys, you're not rebuilding. But it is a retooling around that core, and they had to sort of decide who from that core was going to stick around. And they made their decisions. I'm just I'm trying to figure out how to answer your question. I think they're going to be roughly the same as last year. I wouldn't be surprised to see the run game take a step forward because it has to. I also wouldn't be surprised to see the defense take a step backward because you're just going to be having younger players breaking in at spots where you've had established veterans before. So that's an unsatisfying answer, I guess, but I think they're going to be battling for that second place spot in a wild card spot this year. And that if they make, a wild card spot this year, that will be a good year for this team. And it kind of sets them up for the next year to make a run. But I do think this is a little bit of a retooling.
Great. Well, I think this has been a good update on a lot of players and a good check-in with our friend Stephen Cohen. Stephen, where would you like people to find you and get to The Athletic? I'm sure you have maybe some more tips on some of those promo codes or something.
Yeah, so honestly, so my Twitter handle is scohen, SEA. And then The Athletics is The Athletic SEA. And whenever there's promos, we'll put them on there. But you can just go to theathletic.com/Seattle, and usually in a little banner ad above the first story, you'll see some kind of promo deal that we're running that week, whether it's for baseball or soccer coverage or whatever. And you can get in there. Sometimes it comes with a 7-day free trial, so you can check it out. But yeah, that's where I'm at. You can always hit me up on Twitter and ask questions about The Athletic if you like, if you're curious, or anything else. If you got strong music opinions that you'd like to talk about, we can talk about that, things like that.
Yeah, definitely focus on those strong music opinions with Steven.
Music opinions.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us, Steven. Really great to have you back on the show. For everyone out there, you can follow us on Twitter at Field Goals, fieldgoals.com, of course. I'm at Kenneth Arthur S. And again, if you like the show and you want to keep it going, please check out Field Goals, the patreon.com/field goals to contribute, a couple bucks a month and keep the podcast going in its current form. So thank you so much for listening to Seahawks Chats with Kenneth Arthur, and we'll check you out next time.